folks. Today I'm going to be reading from a book that I've borrowed from my father-in-law. It came in a nice box set, but I tried to make a video opening the box and showing the box, but it's a wee bit loud. So I've decided to just go ahead and show you the book. When 100 years after the Austrians fired the first shots of war against the Serbs, the events of the First World War are remembered as some of the most devastating and traumatic in history. From the brutal carnage of the Somme, Arras, Passchendaele and Gallipoli, to colonial campaigns in Africa, Mesopotamia and Palestine, from revolution in Russia to civil war in Ireland, the Great War Remembered brings the conflict of 1914 to 1918 to life as never before. Gary Sheffield's authoritative text is supplemented by over 200 photographs and colour battle maps, as well as more than 30 painstakingly researched rare facsimile documents, personal and unit war diaries, letters, secret plans and telegrams, orders, maps and posters that until now have been filed or exhibited in museums and archives around the world, including Kitchener's orders to the British Expeditionary Force sent to France in 1914, a letter describing the Christmas truce of 1914, Douglas Haig's handwritten draft of his famous Backs to the Wall order, produced in association with Imperial War Museums. This is the ultimate interactive guide to the Great War. The Great War Remembered. So there's a DVD in here. Just paused for a wee second there just to readjust the camera. So, introduction. The single event that more than any other can be said to have shaped the world we live in is the First World War. The Second World War grew out of the First. It was not a given that a second Great War would occur, but there was sufficient unfinished business from 1914 to 1918 to make it likely. The global spread of the First World War was such that almost no part was left untouched, either directly or indirectly. The resources of great empires were mobilised to fight a total war. Soldiers came from tropical North Queensland and West Africa to fight for Britain and France against Germany and Belgium. Labourers from South Africa, China and Vietnam were sent to work on the Western Front. Men from the far reaches of the Russian and Austro-Hungarian empires battled each other in the Carpathians. The war continues to affect us. In Britain, opinion is sharply polarised between those who see the war as a monstrous tragedy which should never have happened, and those who agree it was a tragedy but say that it was not of Britain's making and Britain had no choice but to get involved. From a French or German perspective, it can be seen as the second round in the Franco-German War that began in 1870 and only ended in 1945. An American might view it as the moment when the USA finally stepped onto the world stage. An Australian, New Zealander or Canadian as the time when their nations began to emerge from under the protective wing of the mother country. Citizens of states such as Poland, the Czech Republic and Latvia can look back to 1914 to 18 as the beginning of, and in some cases an extremely prolonged, process of achieving self-national determination. The powder keg, that is the modern Middle East, has its origins in Britain, in British and French meddling in the ruins of the Ottoman Empire. German Nazism, Italian fascism and Soviet communism were all byproducts of the First World War. The generals of the war still excite passionate debates, with individuals lined up for and against. Haig and Petain remain controversial figures, although for very different reasons, and historians still debate the merits of Conrad, Foch, French, Pershing, Brusilov, Kemmel, Joffre, Currie and Monash as commanders. But increasingly the ordinary soldier has taken centre stage, and we should not forget the civilians, women, older men and children whose support for the war was critical. As historians are increasingly realising, home front and battlefront were closely intertwined. This book enables us to explore the First World War through text, pictures and memorabilia. I hope that it gives readers some idea of the issues at stake, the strategies, the tactics and battles, and the lives of the people who were there. Gary Sheffield, University of Birmingham, March 2014. Opposite, soldiers from the 2nd Special Regiment at the Guet post in the frontline trenches in front of La Pompelle in 1916. Below, Canadian troops guard German prisoners as they use a stretcher and a light railway truck to transport wounded soldiers to get medical attention at the Vimy Ridge in April 1917. The slide towards conflict. The origins of the war. The events that plunged Europe into war in 1914 moved with dizzying speed. On the 28th of June, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated by a young Serb, Gavrilo Princip. A month later, Austria declared war on Serbia, which Vienna blamed for the murder, and by 5th of August, the major states of Europe were at war. The immediate trigger for the First World War was thus rivalry between states in the Balkans. Russia backed Serbia, the latter state posing as the protector of the Serbs in the polyglot Habsburg Empire. Austria risked war with Russia to preserve its influence in the Balkans, having perceived on the 5th of July a firm promise of support from its allies Germany. Russia, alarmed by the threat to its security and prestige, mobilised its forces, followed by Germany and then France, Russia's ally since 1892. The German attack on Belgium on the 4th of August then brought Britain into the war. In retrospect, the war seemed to many to be almost accidental, with states slipping into an unwanted conflict. However, there were wider issues at play. The German defeat of Napoleon III's France in 1870-71 had destroyed the existing international balance of power. But Germany, despite its ever-increasing economic power, chose, under the leadership of the Iron Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, to live within the new situation it had created and to avoid threatening its neighbours while keeping France isolated. All this changed when the young and mentally unbalanced Kaiser Wilhelm II came to the throne in 1888. In 1890, Wilhelm dismissed Bismarck and the system of treaties that the Chancellor had carefully constructed to protect Germany began to unravel. Wilhelm's bellicose Weltpolitik, world policy, led to diplomatic encirclement, having thoroughly frightened Britain, France and Russia. The British government abandoned its policy of non-alignment and established an entente, although not a formal alliance, with France and Russia in 1904. By 1914, Germany had backed itself into a corner. Many historians agree that Germany took advantage of the situations in the Balkans to attempt to break up the Entente, even at the risk of a major war. Others argue that Germany actually desired and planned for a war. Russia, defeated by the Japanese in 1904-05, was rapidly rebuilding its military strength, and some of the German elite favoured a war to prevent it from re-emerging as a rival. At the very least, the ambitious programme of annexations and the creation of de facto economic colonies across Europe that was so drawn up by Germany shortly after the Russo-Japanese War began indicates that it was willing to take advantage of the opportunity to undertake aggressive expansionism. Likewise, there was nothing accidental about Austria-Hungary's decision to crush Serbia, regardless of the risks of wider war. The Austrians, excluded over the previous century from spheres of influence in Germany and Italy, believed that they could not afford to be marginalised in the Balkans, striking a blow against nationalism, a force that threatened to rot the multinational Habsburg Empire from within, was also highly attractive. There were, of course, other factors in the outbreak of the First World War. Although arms races do not in themselves cause wars, military competition before 1914 added to the sense of impending crisis. The Anglo-German naval rivalry was particularly dangerous. Britain's primary defence force was the Royal Navy, and the German fleet building programme initiated under Admiral Tirpitz posed a direct threat to the security of the British homeland and the British Empire. In response, the British drew closer to France and Russia and in 1906 launched HMS Dreadnought. This revolutionary new battleship, the brainchild of Admiral Sir John Jackie Fisher, was superior to anything else afloat. It forced the Germans to respond, ratcheting the naval race to a more dangerous level. Domestic politics were also significant. Sir Edward Grey, the British Foreign Secretary, had been accused of failing to deter Germany by not sending strong enough signals concerning British intentions. Yet his hand was weakened by the unwillingness of many of his liberal colleagues in the cabinet to contemplate war. In France, Germany's decision to seize the province of Alsace and Lorraine in 1871 caused lasting resentment. In Germany, the rise of the Social Democrats alarmed the imperial government and may have contributed to a desire for a popular war. Above all, a pan-European conflict of militarism and a general belief in social Darwinism, the idea that the survival of the fittest applied to nations and peoples, led to a febrile atmosphere in which resorting to war to settle disputes came to be seen as natural and acceptable. For all that, when Article 231 of the 1919 Treaty of Versailles (brackets, that ended the war in the West) close brackets, blamed Germany and its allies for the outbreak of the war, it encapsulated an essential truth. This is Otto von Bismarck, 1815 to 1898. Bismarck was instrumental in uniting the disparate German states into an empire under the leadership of Prussia. He used a series of wars against Denmark in 1864, Austria in 1866, and France in 1870-71 to establish the new state, with the King of Prussia being proclaimed Kaiser (brackets, Emperor) Wilhelm I in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles in 1871. Bismarck's subtle diplomatic skills, which played a large part in keeping Europe at peace in the last quarter of the 19th century, were sorely missed after his dismissal by Wilhelm II in 1890. Tsar Nicholas II, 1868 to 1918. Russia played a key role in the outbreak of the war. Humiliated by their impotence during the crisis engendered by the Austrian annexation of Bosnia in 1908, in 1914 the Russian leaders were determined to stand firm in the Balkans. In part, this was linked to domestic factors. Under Tsar Nicholas II, who ruled from 1894 to 1917, Russia became politically unstable, with an abortive revolution breaking out in 1905. In the July 1914 crisis, the Russian government was keen to demonstrate to domestic critics as well as foreign enemies that it was capable of strong action. Mobilization. The outbreak of war. For years before 1914, general staffs in Europe had prepared elaborate plans for mobilization in the event of war. During the 19th century, Most states had adopted a system of conscripting men into the army for a set, often fairly short, period of time, then sending them back to civilian life. These reservists were then recalled to the colours in time of emergency. This arrangement allowed armies to put vast numbers of men into the field. Germany's field army of 82 infantry divisions included 31 reserve formations. The French had 72 divisions, 25 of which were composed of reservists. The major exception was Britain, which relied on a long-service regular army backed up by a volunteer army, volunteer part-time territorial force, rather than on conscription. Shortly after the war began, the new Secretary of State for War, Field Marshal Lord Kitchener, called for volunteers for a new mass army. This ensured that by 1916, Britain had an army comparable in size to its allies and enemies. But in August 1914, Britain could only put a mere 6 infantry divisions in the field, in addition, of course, to the might of the Royal Navy. The war plans of the great powers dictated that no time could be wasted between mobilising and fighting. The German pre-war plan, developed under General Alfred von Schlieffen, was designed to compensate for the fact that Germany would face a war on two fronts, hurling the bulk of its force westwards and invading neutral Belgium to outflank the French frontier forces. Germany would defeat France in a matter of weeks. Its forces would then redeploy via the strategic railway system to face the Russian army, which the Germans calculated would be slow to move. That infringement of Belgian territory was likely to bring the British into the war was discounted. That infringement of Belgian territory was likely to bring the British into the war was discounted. The operational concept was based on the idea of encirclement, a favourite German military gambit that served them well in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71 (brackets) and was to be repeated on numerous occasions in the Second World War (close brackets). If the French advanced into Lorraine, so much the better. The German trap would close behind them. The Schlieffen plan, hotly debated by historians in recent years, stands as an example of a gamble of breathtaking proportions. If it failed, Germany would be in deep trouble. The French army pinned its hopes on Plan XVII 17, I believe, or 27? 17. A strategy. I'm not very good with my Roman numerals. The French army pinned its hopes on Plan XVII, a strategy developed by the French General Staff under the leadership of General Joseph Joffre. The plan was founded on the concept of the all-out offensive and aggressive military doctrine associated with Lieutenant General and later Marshal Ferdinand Foch. Both Joffre and Foch were to go on to play extremely prominent roles during the First World War. On the outbreak of war, major French forces would surge into Lorraine to recapture the provinces lost to Germany after the Franco-Prussian War, while others would advance further to the north. Everywhere the French would carry the war to the enemy. As the consequence of secret talks between the British and French staffs, it was decided that the British Expeditionary Force, too small to carry out an independent strategy, would take its place on the left of the French army, a decision reluctantly confirmed by an ad hoc war council of politicians and generals convened on the outbreak of war. The Belgian army, less than 120,000 strong in 1914, could do little but resist the Germans as best they could until joined by Franco-British forces. The French, British and German armies were armed with broadly similar weapons: bolt-action magazine rifles capable of rapid fire, modern quick-firing artillery, and a limited number of machine guns. All retained considerable numbers of cavalry, armed with both firearms and swords for reconnaissance and the charge. Every army also had a small number of primitive airplanes. General staffs had studied the most recent military campaigns in South Africa in 1899 to 1902 and Manchuria in 1904 to 1905, and had incorporated the perceived lessons into their thinking. None were aware of the devastating power of modern weapons or the difficulty in overcoming fixed fortifications. To strike first and win quickly before the front could congeal into trench warfare seemed a logical extrapolation from recent wars, and the Russo-Japanese War apparently demonstrated that determined troops with high morale could overcome entrenched defenders, albeit at heavy cost and casualties. The French were the most extreme exponents of the cult of the offensive and the moral battlefield, in which heavy emphasis was placed on morale, brackets, the words being used interchangeably at this time, close brackets. But these concepts also influenced the British and Germans. These pre-war doctrines were not entirely wrong, but undoubtedly contributed to the huge butcher's bill in the early months of the war. The French army in 1914. French soldiers were sent to war in 1914 wearing antiquated uniforms of blue coats and bright red trousers that symbolised the élan of the army. By contrast, the Germans had dull grey uniforms that made their soldiers less conspicuous, but the British took this trend furthest, wearing practical khaki, brackets, dust-coloured clothing. During the course of the war, the French switched to a more sensible horizon blue uniform, and the Germans similarly modified their dress, swapping the spiked pickelhaube for the coal scuttle steel helmet. This is Field Marshal Earl Kitchener. Above, in this photograph, large proportion of British battalions that went to war in 1914 were composed of reservists like these men. The Grenadier Guards reservists. To medical inspection room and a hand pointing at me. They're queuing in to get their medicals. The Battle of the Frontiers, Lorraine and the Schlieffen Plan. The first shots of war were fired by the Austrians against the Serbs on the 29th of July, but the outbreak of fighting in Western Europe was not long delayed. The first major clash came on the 5th of August with the German attack on the Belgian fortress of Liège, which held out until the 13th of August. This was highly significant because the longer the Belgians could impede the German advance, the further behind the schedule in the Schlieffen Plan would fall. The Belgian army held the line of the River Get before retreating into the fortress of Antwerp on the 20th of August, and the Belgian capital, Brussels, was lost the same day. The Germans continued to advance, capturing the fortress of Huy, H-U-Y, brackets, on the River Meuse, and beginning a short siege of Namur, which fell on the 23rd of August. Moltke, who had succeeded Schlieffen as Chief of the Great General Staff in 1906, was forced to deploy a sizable force to mask Antwerp and to protect the flank of the main German advance from a Belgian sortie. On the 5th of October, the port was reinforced by a British force in a demonstration of British sea power. This further weakened and slowed the German main effort, partly out of frustration and partly to discourage guerrilla activity. The Germans carried out Schrecklichkeit, a policy of terror that included sacking the medieval city of Louvain and killing civilians. The oft-mocked Allied propaganda about German atrocities, although frequently exaggerated, did have foundations in truth. Plan XVII was initiated on the 6th of August with the movement of a French corps into Alsace, only for it to be repulsed by the defenders. A follow-up attack under General Paul Pau resulted in the capture of Mulhouse on the 8th of August. The French troops were greeted by cheering crowds, glad to welcome the liberators. However, shortly afterwards, the victorious French were ordered to abandon their gains so that troops could be switched to meet the growing crisis to the north. The major French offensive into Lorraine commenced on the 14th of August with two armies, the first and second. This was a complex undertaking. As the further the French advanced, the wider their frontage of attack became. In spite of the fact that, according to the Schlieffen Plan, the German forces should have kept to the defensive, they went on to the attack, and on the 20th of August defeated the French in the twin battles of Morhange and Sarrebourg, and then pushed on to the French frontier. Some French formations fought well. General Foch's 20th Iron Corps held its ground stubbornly at Morhange and was preparing to counterattack when, to Foch's astonishment, it received orders to pull back. Quotes, "You don't know what is happening to the neighbouring corps," close quotes, his Chief of Staff, General Denis Duchesne, sourly commented. The 20th Corps, weary but in good order, covered the retreat of the Second Army. A few days later, Foch's son, a junior officer with the 131st Infantry Regiment, was killed in battle just a short distance away. The French stabilised the situation just as a new German offensive was getting underway. Joffre, the commander-in-chief, had ordered two armies to attack into the hilly wooded terrain of the Ardennes in the belief that the German forces in this sector were weak. This misapprehension was based on an intelligence failure. The French had not realised the extent to which the Germans would use reserve troops to create new divisions. In encounter battles, brackets, unplanned meeting engagements, close brackets, at Neufchâteau and Virton on the 21st and 22nd of August, the attackers suffered further heavy losses and were pulled back behind the River Meuse. I'm going to call this Plan 27, I think that's what that says. Plan 27 was proving a bloody failure. Around 300,000 French soldiers became casualties in the Battle of the Frontier. A report from 2nd Army in Lorraine stated, "The troops, infantry and artillery have been sorely tested. Our artillery is held at a distance by the long-range artillery of our enemies. It cannot get close enough for counter-battery fire. Our infantry has attacked with elan, but have been halted primarily by enemy artillery fire and by unseen enemy infantry hidden in trenches." Close brackets, close quotes. In spite of the setbacks, Papa Joffre remained imperturbably calm, although he energetically sacked incompetent or perhaps mere unlucky commanders. In little more than a month, he removed 50 generals, including no less than 38 divisional commanders and promoted talent and by now battle-hardened leaders from further down the military hierarchy. One such officer was Ferdinand Foch, promoted to command 9th Army. By mid-August, both Joffre and Moltke were less focused on Alsace-Lorraine. Now they looked towards Belgium, for it was there, as the Germans advanced, that a major crisis was brewing. This is Joseph Jacques César Joffre, 1852 to 1931. Joffre, Chief of French General Staff, 1911 to 1914, and Commander-in-Chief, 1914 to 1916, oversaw the development and implementation of Plan 27, but then was able to rescue the French army from the consequences of that plan. His legendary calmness reflected ability of a very high order to cope with the shocks of war. Joffre, the ruthless sacker of subordinates, was himself removed from command at the end of 1916, having failed to break the deadlocked Western Front of the previous 2 years. This Helmut von Moltke the Younger, 1848 to 1916. Von Moltke was the nephew of Helmut von Moltke the Elder, the German victor of the 1870-71 Franco-Prussian War. Although a belligerent advocate of war in the summer of 1914, he lacked his uncle's qualities of self-belief and ruthlessness. On campaign, finding it increasingly difficult to control the vast German armies, he collapsed with nervous breakdown after the Battle of Marne. He was blamed by contemporaries and some historians for meddling with Schlieffen's original plan. This is unfair, as the plan was likely to fail on logistical grounds alone. And this is a map of the German and French war plans for 1914. So the light green arrows are the Schlieffen plan. The Germans were going to come down through Belgium, and the French plan was to just go straight on the offensive. Mons Delicato, the first actions of the BEF, the British Expeditionary Forces. The Kaiser, in an order of 19th of August, referred to General French's insignificant little army. The word insignificant was translated into English as contemptible. Revelling in the insult, the BEF of 1914 acquired its nickname, the Old Contemptibles. Wilhelm II's order illustrated how casually the German High Command regarded the British Army's presence on the continent. In fact, Moltke welcomed the opportunity to defeat the BEF as well as the French army. Given the disarray of the Allies, it seemed that this was a distinct possibility. Lannesac's French Fifth Army pushed into Belgium with Sir John French's BEF on its left. But as French Third and Fourth Armies fell back, the flank of Lannesac's Fifth Army was uncovered, and it found itself threatened by three German armies. From the east by Third Army of von Hausen, to the front by von Bülow's Second Army, and von Kluck's First Army to the west. In the Battle of the Sambre on the 23rd to the 21st to the 23rd of August, the French met defeat. However, the manoeuvres of the three German armies were poorly synchronised, and they were unable to fully profit from their successes. On Lannesac's left, on the 23rd of August, the British fought their first battle in Western Europe since Waterloo, 99 years before. The problems encountered by Sir John French and Lannesac, neither of whom was fluent in the other's language, in attempting to coordinate their operations, reveals much about the challenges posed by fighting alongside allies, and the British and French in effect fought two separate but adjacent battles. Mons was the classic encounter battle. Led by the 9th Lancers, the British Second Corps under General Horace Smith-Dorrien reached Mons on the 22nd of August. Mons was a mining area of slag heaps and chimneys, not an ideal place to fight a battle. By the following day, 3rd and 5th Divisions had taken up positions along the banks of the Mons-Conde Canal, in Mons itself and in outlying villages. The Cavalry Division was held in reserve. When German First Army appeared on the scene, they were taken by surprise, as Kluck believed the BEF was at Tournai. Mounting clumsy frontal assaults, the attackers were bloodily repulsed in most places. The sheer pressure of German forces and heavy artillery fire meant that the outnumbered BEF could not hold on indefinitely. Mons was not an affair in which generals calmly manoeuvred troops as if on a giant chessboard. Rather, individual units and subunits fought a series of almost private battles. The machine gun section of the 4th Royal Fusiliers conducted a rearguard action at a bridge that resulted in the award of 2 Victoria Crosses, one posthumous. Late on the 23rd of August, the 2nd Corps began to fall back into a new position. Longuezac's 5th Army was in full retreat. When French discovered this, the BEF too disengaged and slipped away from the Mons battlefield. Mons was a tactical victory for the British at the cost of 1,600 casualties, which was very light by later standards, but strategically the Germans had the upper hand and continued to drive forward. Command and control was fragile. British 1st Corps under General Sir Douglas Haig remained in touch with Longuezac's French 5th Army, but Haig lost contact with Smith Dorrien, and Sir John French at General Headquarters was able to exercise little control over the BEF's 2 corps. On the 22nd of August, a German advance briefly threatened 1st Corps headquarters in Landrecies, causing some short-lived panic. For the BEF, the retreat from Mons was a gruelling experience. Apart from the hard march under the hot sun, retreating from an enemy they believed they had defeated was demoralising for many British soldiers. Spirit rose when, on the 26th of August, the order was given to halt and deploy for battle. With the Germans in pursuit, Smith Dorrien was forced to turn and fight at Lacato, 50 kilometres, or 30 miles, south of Mons. Once again, the 2nd Corps inflicted a sharp tactical defeat on the Germans, who were as tired as the British. But this time, British losses were much heavier, some 7,800. The 1st Gordon Highlanders were accidentally left behind when the rest of the Corps retreated and were forced to surrender. The Germans too suffered badly, and Smith Dorrien was able to resume their retreat. The BEF was battered but intact and had fulfilled a vital role on the flank of the French 5th Army. French, however, temporarily lost his nerve and wanted to pull out of the line to refit. Kitchener had to cross over from England to forbid it. The end of August neared with the campaign still in balance. Sir John Denton Pinkston, French, 1852 to 1925. Field Marshal French took the BEF to France in 1914 as its Commander-in-Chief. An Irish cavalryman, he established his reputation as an able commander of mounted troops during the South African or Second Boer War of 1899 to 1902, when he forged an effective partnership with his Chief of Staff, Douglas Haig. He did not cope well with the demands of commanding the BEF and was replaced in December 1915 by Haig after the failure at the Battle of Loos. French never forgave his former protégé. This photograph down here. The 4th Royal Fusiliers resting in Mons on Saturday, the 22nd of August 1914. On the next day, the battalion saw heavy fighting. This photograph is British soldiers and French cavalrymen fraternise outside a cafe in 1914. The Mons campaign of August strained the inter-allied relations. Sir Horace Lockwood, Smith-Dorrien, 1858 to 1930. General Smith-Dorrien first saw action during the Zulu War in 1879, where he escaped from the Battle of Isandlwana. His brilliant handling of Second Corps in August 1914 played a major role in ensuring the survival of the BEF, but he was unfairly sacked by Sir John French during the Second Battle of Ypres that began on the 22nd of April 1915. The two had fallen out before the war, and French was a vindictive man. Smith-Dorrien's reputation has endured rather better than French's. I'm going to leave it there for now. I'll make another part 2 with this book. Just going to carry on from here and do the next pages. Next time. See you later. Sweet dreams.